Here we are for another round of the 70s versus the 90s, and it's a Cowboy showdown when I put Sidney Pollack's The Electric Horseman against Gregg Champion's The Cowboy Way. And this one was a real hard decision to make because both of these movies are really good in their own regard and they're both fun in their own way. So let's just dive right on in to the nitty and the picky. First up, we have Sidney Pollack's The Electric Horseman, starring Robert Redford and Jane Fonda. And of course, Robert Redford is basically the titular character, the Electric Horseman. His character's name is Sonny Steele, and he's like a five-time rodeo champion and all this good stuff. And he's a real ass cowboy, but then he also gets like sponsors, and he's like the face of this like breakfast cereal that's all like rodeo centric, like a ranch breakfast or some shit like that. Some fucked up name like that, but he's the spokesman of it. They even make him grow a mustache to fit their whole brand image of what they think a cowboy should be. And we kind of see this through montage of the opening of the film to the Willie Nelson song, My Heroes Have Always Been Cowboys. And Willie Nelson does all the songs in the movie and also stars in the film as one of Sonny's homies in the film, And, of course, some of Willie Nelson's best songs are in this movie. Of course, Mamas Don't Let Your Babies Grow Up to Be Cowboys and a bevy of other ones. And it really adds to the film and stuff. And especially that opening song, My Heroes Have Always Been Cowboys. It kind of shows how, like, he wants Sonny started out as like a smiling cowboy, and then now he's a depressed alcoholic cowboy because he's not really doing much cowboying anymore. He's slanging breakfast cereal for this corporate giant that wants to whore out his image and stuff. And it kind of comes to the last straw when he's having to ride this horse that's all drugged out, the Rising Star and stuff. They've been messing with his tendons and all this stuff. And they're wanting him to be on stage with a bunch of disco dancing gals and lights and motorcycles. And so he just says, fuck it, and just rides off with the horse all the way down the Vegas Strip and all the way into the desert. And his whole goal is to set this horse free. And by setting this horse free, he's also going to set himself free. He doesn't necessarily have any more agenda than that. But of course, as the course of the film, they want their horse back. It was a fucking $12 million racing horse. And, it's basically, they call him a horse thief and stuff. But his saving grace is a headstrong reporter played by Jane Fonda, who starts out in the film kind of ridiculing him. But, she's one of those hard-hitting journalists and stuff. But once she really gets down to the root of who Sonny really is, she ends up kind of falling in love with him. And, and usually these types of romances are very irksome. This was like the third time that Jane Fonda and Robert Redford had been in the movie together. The other two times, of course, being The Chase and Barefoot in the Park. And, the way this romance kind of blossoms, it comes from more of a mutual respect. He respects her as a reporter by finding him when like no other reporter could. And she respects him for this kind of noble mission that he's on and stuff. And of course, the corporate head is played brilliantly by John Saxon, he's just so sleazy in this film, and all the little fucktards around him and shit. And of course, Alan Arbus is brilliant as the director, choreographer, whatever the fuck for that whole Vegas show and stuff, of course. And then, Wilford Brimley pops up in this. There's a lot of great Western character actors that show their faces in here too. And, it's that chase sequence too, when them cops are chasing him on that horse, or where he's on the horse and the cops are chasing him with the cars, and then the one car flips over on top of the other car, and that's some brilliant shit. And this was even like a year or so before the Blues Brothers did their wild antics. So probably had the same fucking stunt team and everything. But the brilliance of this film too is the way that it ends, because with a film like this, and especially with Sidney Pollack directing it, and Robert Redford starring in it, it has the potential to be lame as fuck, but it really isn't, because even though there's a romance between Jane Fonda and Robert Redford, it doesn't like bog down the film with corniness, because at the end they both go their own ways. She goes to report the story. She doesn't review, because she thinks she knows where he's taking the horse, but it's not. He kind of leads her on to believe it, and it's fucking brilliant. The horse goes away, and almost brings a tear to your eye when that horse is running free. And, my heroes have always been cowboys. fucking Bill is poetry, you know, and then they go their separate way. You know, she thanks him on air, doesn't reveal where the horse is and stuff, and he just walks off free, just like the horse does. It's a very beautiful film, one of the better performances that Robert Redford has done, and of course, Jane Fonda's absolutely brilliant in the film too. It's really not a complaint I have for this movie. You know, it's like it has a statement, but it doesn't overshadow the film with the statement. It's got real ass characters because you know Robert Redford plays that just this haggard rodeo guy, cowboy that's just you know at the end of his rope and he needs to find himself again, and he does. And everybody in the course of the film, you know, really gets to the root of what it all means and stuff. And then we move forward to Gregg Champion's The Cowboy Way, starring Woody Harrelson and Kiefer Sutherland. There's no romance in this film. The closest thing to a romance would be, I guess you call it a bromance, for lack of a better word, between Woody Harrelson and Kiefer Sutherland. You know, they're childhood friends. They grow up all through the rodeo and stuff. You know, they're partners and everything through and through. But then they kind of had a falling out that we don't see in the film. You know, it's alluded to. And, you know, the way they're brought back together is a friend of theirs named Nacho. He trying to bring his daughter into the States from Cuba, but then she's got into some shit because the fucker that runs the little sweatshop that she was coming into, Dylan McDermott, he's a fucking greedy motherfucker. So he's all trying to milk the old man for more money. And the guy above him, played by the brilliant Thomas Melian, which by this time in Thomas Melian's career, he was very subdued. This wasn't whacked out, drug crazed, bat shit off the walls Thomas Melian. This like old subdued Thomas Melian. And, you know, he's trying to rein this dude in, you know, he's trying to run a respectable business, you know, but yeah, it's kind of hard when you got sleazy motherfuckers like that working for you. So now Nacho goes to New York, try to get his daughter, but then nobody hears from him. So Kiefer Sutherland takes it upon himself to go find him in New York, and Woody Harrelson tags along with him. And through this journey, they still have their ups and downs with it, and they get into a lot of antics. The film itself kind of feels like Midnight Cowboy meets Crocodile Dundee. It has a lot of the same tropes as these movies, most notably the Midnight Cowboy reference. Of course, you know, having the cowboys walk through the busy streets of New York, you know, one can't help but think of Midnight Cowboy, and I'm sure the filmmakers were very aware of that imagery and stuff. But the biggest one for me is that party that Woody Harrelson ends up going to, because he gets that invite from the lovely Marg Helgenberger, to go to this little fashion event and stuff. Turns out like she wants him to model underwear and stuff because they like his style. They like the whole cowboy look and stuff. But that party is very like kind of the 90s update of Midnight Cowboys, little, you know, Warhol-esque party. And even Rance Howard, who has a small cameo in this film, looks like a withered Andy Warhol and stuff, and gives a very Andy Warhol response when Woody Harrelson talks to him. And then also like there's a lot of elements of like Crocodile Dundee and shit too. Ernie Hudson, who plays a mounted police officer, kind of has that feel of like the friendly black character that are in all these movies. And of course, he's gonna make you well aware of all the black cowboys, especially William Pickett, who invented Bulldog, and so, you know. But the film itself is fun. You know, I'm picking it apart because, you know, this is a competition. You know, like I said, this is a very hard decision because both of these movies are really great in their own way. Like, you know, but the only thing that they have action-wise that comes close to that chase sequence in The Electric Horseman is that ending where they rope fucking Dylan McDermott on that train and they flies off. You know, you can clearly tell that's a dummy they pull. I mean, there's probably no fucking way that you could get an actual stuntman to do that shit. I mean, there are certain limits to the human body and what one can do, you know, although stuntmen can do some fucking wild and crazy shit. I mean, watching them, you know, chase that train on them horses through the streets of New York, that's pretty impressive, but it's still, that's where like the adventure element of like Crocodile Dundee, probably more Crocodile Dundee 2, because he wasn't really fighting crime in the first one and stuff. But it's definitely a cartoonish fun. But even the characters are so like cartoonish and tropey that they don't really feel real. Like even when you finally find out the reason why Woody Harrelson missed the rodeo, it's one of the lamest fucking things. All of it. That's where the bromance tag fucking comes into. And also, whereas like the Electric Horseman has a a bunch of great Willie Nelson songs. We get a fucking shit ass Bon Jovi song at the end of fucking Cowboy Way. And so that definitely takes points off of it. It loses points for lack of originality, because the thing about the Electric Horseman is it was original. It's very original. Like, I mean, granted, like, we haven't seen that done before with the cowboy who's lost his way, trying to find it again, and then setting himself free. But it has a very like strong message, about like living free and not being bogged down by society's bullshit. Cowboy Way is just a fun little cartoon that checks all the boxes to be a good movie and stuff. Like, I wouldn't necessarily say the acting is any worse or any better than the Electric Horseman. Honestly, these movies are kind of even. But this, like I said, this is a competition. One of them has to win. And I got to give it to the Electric Horseman, because this one really fucking surprised me. Usually, like, Robert Redford is mid as fuck, but man, he really crushed it in this. And plus, the chemistry that he has with Jane Fonda is absolutely brilliant. Not to say that the chemistry that Kiefer Sutherland and Woody Harrelson had in Cowboy Way wasn't any short of brilliant. I mean, they work very well together, but it's kind of that whiny ass bullshit that came to be prominent in the 90s, as opposed, like, when you still had real ass men in the 70s, and even like dealing with a woman like Jane Fonda, there's always an odd pair of, fucking Hanoi Jane, and then like the clean cut all American Robert Redford, and him being able to kind of tame her in certain respects kind of would allude to what Ted Turner would do to her to a brief spell. So, I mean, it's got to go to the Electric Horseman. For anybody keeping score, that's 71 to 57. The 70s are up by 14. Like I said, they're kicking mucho ass, man. That lead continues to grow. The 90s come back every once in a while, but the 70s were holding strong because the movies just felt more real. They had real ass people in them. They didn't get bogged down by a lot of bullshit, and that the 90s was, one of the last vestiges of great cinema, but it just sometimes fell short, in the originality department, because they were all trying to be the 70s. So if I've said anything wrong, anything you disagree with, feel free to eviscerate me in the comments. I mean, this is all up for debate. This is just one asshole's opinion. I'm on a self-indulgent journey to find out which decade was better for movies, the 70s or the 90s. Right now, it's looking like I'm right. It's the 70s, but like I said, we still got a long way to go before I can officially say that I'm right. I got like 6 pages of this shit, and I got to know. If you got any suggestions, I'll bump them up, whenever I get to do them, whenever I got free time, you'll see these bonus rounds. So stay tuned for it. Gonna be a wild ride, partners.